Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoiler-free review for The Sword of Kaigen by ML Wang. This was our House Salt Book Club pick for March, so we've already done the live show for that and talked about all of our spoilery thoughts, so I'll link that on the screen if you read the book and you're interested. But this is a standalone, although I would actually call it a companion, even though it's advertised as a standalone, high fantasy story that primarily follows two characters. This is taking place in a world that's kind of, or at least a setting of the world that is inspired by feudal Japan, and follows Mamoru and Misaki. Misaki is Mamoru's mother. Mamoru is a teenager who is just kind of discovering that things about the world and like the political things and machinations aren't quite what they seem. She knows that and also has a more violent history, and that is becoming more relevant as things are sort of unfolding. And we follow this family essentially for a period of time during the beginning of kind of a war, or like an ongoing war that is sort of resurfacing. This book does have trigger warnings for war, rape, death of children, death of people in general, anything like kind of war related, and misogyny and sexism. So this became a really popular book because of the SPFPO, self-publishing fantasy book blog off with that. It's basically an award for self-published books, fantasy and sci-fi books specifically, maybe just fantasy. But this won a few years ago, and so a lot of people were talking about it. And so this is one that has been on my radar for some time. So first off, we talk about the world building. This book is really conflicting for me because there were some parts that really resonated and were done really well, and other parts that I think desperately could have used an editor. And for the world building, this is where I started to get a little bit conflicted because there's a lot of info dumping. There's a lot of like sort of telling and not quite showing. And the reason that I call this more of a companion than a full-blown standalone is that yes, you can read it without having read the rest of the sort of series that this is a part of or adjacent to. But I honestly find the world building to be very, again, dumpy, not quite complete in a lot of ways because it obviously is alluding to other parts of the world in the story where it would make much more sense, and is just soupy, as one of the book club members described it. So there's a lot of pieces that we are told that I think were probably relevant to the greater plot of this larger overarching story. This is a part, like, again, adjacent to a series that this author was writing before, and has since actually stopped writing that series. Maybe we'll return to it in the future, maybe won't. But this is taking place in that same world, and I think there's a lot of world building elements that would work better knowing them within the greater story. Like, there was definitely a lot of things about this book that felt incomplete because they were maybe going to be wrapped up in the other series, or they were alluding to things in the other series, or things like that. But aside from the soupy parts, I did think the world was like fairly interesting, although I had some like difficulties with not really being sure like where in time this was supposed to be, because the part of the world that we're following is very traditional, more like in feudal Japan, like the use of like swords and magic and things, not really guns, but then there are guns, there are planes, there are ambulances, there are essentially cell phones. So I just had a hard time picturing things because on one hand, things are described very and then there are other times that like this technology is brought up. What I did like though was the magic system. It's very elemental magic. Think Avatar: The Last Airbender. There are people that have control of like more like water and ice, earth, air, fire, things like that. So I love elemental magic in general. This I liked as well. Next, we talk about our characters, which I think are the strongest point of the story. This is definitely about character interactions, sort of not quite slice of life, and that slice of life is very sort of like cozy feeling, but you get to follow these characters for like a very short amount of time and see like things evolving between them, and how different dynamics are changing and things like that. So I will say that I liked Misaki more as a character. I could have followed her the entire time, but I did like how her son was sort of used to flesh out parts of her story. I honestly feel like this is primarily her story, even though he's a main character as well. But we still have him as like part of it. The thing that I found most compelling actually was the relationship between her and her husband, which is one of the only times that I can like really recall feeling one way about a character and their interactions with people, and then kind of not completely 180ing, but really changing my opinion about them. So that is really skillfully done. There are parts of this and like the characters and the development of things and some of like the theming that is so well done, but there's other parts that I think could have used like a nice polish and been so much better. I did like a lot of the side characters. I did like how this was like a very collective family, and just like the ways they try to like support each other and like learn about each other and things. Like all of that I really dug. Lastly, I'm gonna talk about the plot. So the beginning I would say is kind of slow. The middle and the end, like I really liked the end a lot. But again, there's a sort of inconsistency in the pacing. And there are things about the plot that aren't fully resolved. Not that they have to be for a standalone, but I do prefer that for a standalone. And again, there's a lot of things that are hinting to greater world plots in the overarching series that I have not read. So there's a lot of pieces that make it not feel like a standalone because there's definitely some unresolved things. And it just felt like for such a big book where we're told so much, they could have really condensed and pruned some of the stuff away because we know so much more than we necessarily need to for this particular story. Like I said, this is much more of a following some characters through a really brutal time in their lives. And that's that. So there's a lot of this extra information that we have we don't really need. So again, parts of the plot I think were a little weaker because they could have used some editing. Overall, I think this book is decent. This did not blow me away in the way that it did a lot of people, but I did see those pearls of what this could be as this author continues to grow. Potentially if they get some like editing and things to really polish it up, I think it would be excellent because this was already really good for being self-published. And I would look forward to seeing what else they have in the future. So I think overall I'm landing with this book between like a 3 and a 3.5. The really good emotional beats and character work really elevated it, but then some of the other messier bits kind of brought it down for me. So I kind of fall in the middle. Not a bad book by any means, but I think not necessarily going to be like this author's best work of all time. So comment below, let me know what you thought of The Sword of Kaigen. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.